Chair of the Columbia Chamber's Military Affairs Task Force. Does a great job for us. So thank you, General Goldsmith, for everything you do for us. So in addition to General Becker, we have Boyd Jones. Boyd is the current chair of the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. Boyd is Senior Vice President with NBSC back here in town. We also have Michael Tandon. Michael is Managing Partner of Trinity Management and Development Corporation. They own a couple of hotels off of Clemson Road, the Hampton Inn and Holiday Inn Suites on Clemson Front Road. So thank you very much for being here, Michael. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to General Becker, who's got some opening comments. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And as Carl Blackstone said, I want to provide a little bit of background information, specifically on what this SPDA is all about, why we're conducting this listening session here on 26 February, and then what this could all mean to the Columbia Midlands community. The Budget Control Act of 2011 forced the Army to downsize from 570,000 to 490,000 by the end of this fiscal year. That's 2015, this October. As a result of these forced cuts in end strength, in 2013, the Army initiated what they called a programmatic environmental assessment, where they looked at 21 installations to determine the environmental and economic impact on those installations of this large project. Now, Fort Jackson was not originally part of that 21 installation programmatic environmental assessment, which was conducted in 2013. However, with no budget resolution in sight and with the threat of sequestration going into effect at the end of this fiscal year, that would be this October, the Army has been forced to look at another round of personnel reductions, this time from 490,000 to 420,000. So it's a reduction of potentially another 70,000 soldiers. Based on this additional reduction of 70,000, the Army has initiated a supplemental programmatic environmental assessment. So they're adding to the PDA that they did in 2013. They've added 9 installations to the original 21. So the Army is now looking at 30 installations. Fort Jackson is one of those 9 and now part of that 30 installation assessment that's being looked at for possible reductions. Here at Fort Jackson, we're looking at a possible reduction of 3,100 positions. That's worst case scenario, but that's what the Army's looking at for the worst case scenario. And that would be 2,400 military and 700 civilian. To put it in perspective, that's just about half of our total workforce at Fort Jackson. We've got about 7,000 permanent party. And we've got another 13,000 trainings in any given day. But you know, the permanent party that does all that training is about 7,000. So we're looking at a possible reduction of almost half of our workforce. As part of the supplemental PDA, the Army conducted a public comment period, which ended last August. And during that period, the communities had the opportunity to send comments to Washington, D.C. Reference this programmatic environmental assessment. The Army in November issued a finding of no significant impact from an environmental standpoint based on the public comment period that ended last August. The Army is now doing these listening sessions at 30 installations, and have been through about 15 installations to this point, to better understand the economic impact on the local communities before making these sequestration-driven force reduction decisions. The listening session for this community, as we talked about, is going to take place on 26 February at the Shandon Baptist Church. It's this community's opportunity to voice their concerns about reductions at Fort Jackson. I want to put this kind of in perspective. So if the Army were to make a decision to reduce Fort Jackson by 3,100 positions, which is the worst case, you know, the folks in uniform, like myself, we would PCS, and we would go to another installation and we would contribute to that local economy. So it's not about, you know, we've got boards and we've got other processes for doing our force reduction across the Army, but this isn't about losing soldiers at Fort Jackson. This is simply about those soldiers at Fort Jackson moving to other installations across the United States that aren't necessarily targeted for reductions. So, you know, I think this is very important for this community to be able to make their voices heard to the Army leadership about why Fort Jackson is important to them, if it's important to them. I think both socially and economically, why Fort Jackson is important to this community. And then the Army's going to take what they hear, not only from Fort Jackson, but the other 29 locations that they hear, and they are going to use what they get from those listening sessions to finally make their decision about where they're going to make force reductions in the future. With that, I will answer questions at the end. I know this is very complicated when you go back to the Budget Control Act, the Bipartisan Budget Act, the presidential budget, sequestration level cuts, but the bottom line is, based on the budget, the Army is being forced to make some very tough decisions about end strength. And we were 570 just a couple years ago. We're at 490, well, just under 500,000 right now. We will be at 490,000 by this October. By 30 September, we'll be at 490,000. And again, if sequestration goes into effect, which right now Congress has not done anything to pass a new budget, if sequestration goes into effect, the Army will be at 420,000 in the next few years. And those are going to be, again, forced very tough decisions by the Army on force structure. So again, I'll turn it over to Mr. Boyd Jones. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jones. Well, good afternoon. Thank you, General. From a business perspective, let me just say that we have a long relationship with the U.S. Army at Fort Jackson. It dates back to 1917, almost 100 years. Matter of fact, Fort Jackson is probably the finest and largest asset that we have in the region. It's not just training 75,000 basic combat troops. It's also training for all of the chaplains in all branches of the military. We train all the drill sergeants in the U.S. Army out here. So it's a tremendous asset. Over 200,000 visitors to Columbia on an annual basis come to graduations. They spend their money in the hospitality industry, and you'll hear a little bit about that in just a moment. They spend their dollar here in our marketplace, and that's significant. And just so you kind of get the breadth of what this asset means to Columbia, South Carolina. Fort Jackson has an annual economic impact of $2 billion. $2 billion. So I want to take you back in history just a little bit. General Goldsmith told me before this meeting, the last Bragg Commission was 2005. Okay, that's 10 years ago. So in the last 10 years, the last decade, the economic impact was $20 billion. You don't find assets like that everywhere. And so when we look out over what we want over the next 10 years, is we want to grow employment in Fort Jackson. We want to grow the investment in Fort Jackson. We want the next 10 years to be better than the last 10 years. One other thing that I think is very important to our marketplace from a business standpoint, that Fort Jackson indirectly impacts. We have over 46,000 military retirees in this region, and Fort Jackson provides benefits for those retirees. That's 46,000 military retirees buying houses, spending their dollar in our marketplace, living here, bringing family members here. Fort Jackson is a tremendous asset. A little bit of history. Some business people 100 years ago, basically in 1917, came together, raised approximately $50,000 and purchased 1,100 acres from the Hampton family, the Hampton estate, to help locate the U.S. Army here, to encourage them to come here. They respected that investment, and they have now taken that 1,100 acres to 52,000 acres in central South Carolina. There's over 1,100 buildings on Fort Jackson. They have put a tremendous investment in our community. Many of our businesses over the last 100 years have benefited from the U.S. Army investment at Fort Jackson. So it's the best asset we have, and we want to grow it. It's a tremendous economic driver for our region, and so we're so happy to have Fort Jackson here. We want February 26th to be a big day for Columbia. because it's important. And so I thank y'all for being here. Thank you for getting the word out, and we'll answer questions at the end. I think you need to hear from a local business person and what that means and what this means to their business. And so Michael Tannen is here. He's the managing partner with Trinity Management and Development Corp. They own a couple of hotels very near to Fort Jackson. They benefit from all the visitors. And so I'm going to ask Michael to come forward now. Please welcome him. Thank you, Michael.
As Carl said, I am a managing partner with Trinity Management and Development Company. We own and operate 2 hotels in Northeast Columbia, as well as we manage a moderate-sized portfolio of residential and commercial real estate. I was actually born in Columbia, born at Lexington Hospital. I've lived in Northeast Columbia specifically most of my life. I realized at an early age the impact that the fort had on my life. Our next door neighbor growing up was he was like a grandfather. He was a World War II veteran. My first girlfriend in high school, her mom was a drill sergeant. My best friend, his dad was a pilot. My brother's best friend's dad was an Army chaplain. My pastor growing up was actually retired Navy, and his whole family was retired veterans. Most of the men in my church were actually veterans. We went to church 2 miles from the fort. And I realized that I didn't realize this at the time, but now looking back, I see that the values of service and sacrifice and patriotism and loyalty and freedom were instilled in me by these men and women growing up. And it worries me to think that my son, who's just now almost 2, might not have that same shaping influence in his life that I had. But the impact of the fort is much more than just personal to me. About half of my tenants in our rental homes are actually active duty military. That's the first people I go after. I advertise with AHRN and at the fort because they just make the best tenants. Roughly 30% of our business at the hotels is actually from the military. And if you all know, we lost the recruiting and retention school last year. That was a big piece of business for us. We actually are forecasting a loss of $1.2 million in net in gross revenue just because of that one piece of business. And further cuts could be very detrimental to my family's way of life, and as well as the nearly 50 employees that we have and their families. I also am affiliated with Awaken Church. We've got a church we took over the old Monkey Joe's building off Clemson Road, and we get the duty and honor of serving with a lot of active duty at Fort Jackson there as well. And just seeing them interact with the community and going to lunch with those guys at Chipotle and having a little men's Bible study on Wednesday afternoons. And so they've got a big impact as well. So, my story is just one of many. Most people in Columbia have grown up with a very similar story. That we know the fort, we love it, and we're shaped by it. And for those of us business owners, it's just a scary thought to see the potential harm that it would have on us and our communities.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it very much. We have a great opportunity on February 26th. Doors open at Shandon Baptist Church at 2 p.m. With the program starting at 3. And the U.S. Army sending 5 folks down to listen to the folks here in Columbia talk about the impact of Fort Jackson on their lives. So we welcome everybody to come out. We need folks there. So there's more information in the press packets, but we look forward to having a big crowd there. At this time, I would like to open up for questions. If anybody has questions for any of the panelists, let us know.
I was just wondering, you mentioned, I believe there have already been 15 listening sessions at other installations. Do you have any feedback on how those have gone, how they've been attended, and how important is it for folks to come out to the one here?
Very important. I have gotten some feedback, and I can't go through all 15. I just think of some of the press releases I've seen. I know Fort Campbell, Kentucky did theirs recently, and I think they got over 2,000 people into their listening session, but turned away another 2,000 that they just didn't have room for, even with an overflow room. So thousands of people showed up. Hawaii recently did their listening session. It's a tough environment there in Hawaii, but they had, I can't remember the exact number, but they had a large turnout as well. So again, I think it's really important, again, for this community to, if Fort Jackson is important to them, to show up, because the Army leadership, and they're sending 5 folks down here from Washington, D.C., will take that into consideration, on the turnout will speak volumes about how important Fort Jackson is, both socially, as you heard, and that's why this is really an evaluation of the socioeconomic impact, but socially as well as economically. And a small turnout, if it's just the senior business leadership, I think that would send a message to the Army as well. But again, this is the Columbia Midlands community opportunity, local people to say, hey, this fort is important to us. And the Army will absolutely take that into consideration.
I have a question for Michael, if you don't mind. You mentioned you're already seeing the decrease from the recruiting school closing. If worst case, and we were to see 3,100 people leaving Fort Jackson, what do you see for the future of these companies? Of where you are currently?
Yeah, it's scary to think, honestly. If you go into a restaurant at lunch, anywhere in Northeast Columbia, you're going to see military. If you go in a hotel, you're going to see military. If you go to the neighborhoods, you see the homes are filled. Go to the Summit, one of our largest communities, and it's filled with military. And in fact, we've got about 10 homes right in the Summit, and I can guarantee you at least half the homes, I've got someone on the same street where it's actually active duty military that has kept that home, and even though the military's moved them elsewhere, they know they want to retire in Columbia, and so they keep that house and rent it out until they can move back here. And worst case scenario, yeah, you can see business closings, you can see just severe impact. So yeah, it's losing that big of a force at Fort Jackson has nothing but really dark downside for our entire city.
Thank you.
Mike,
Yes, sir.
you talk about the number of visitors coming in and soldiers to live here. How do you see the families and respond to the perception that they have here? And how do they feel about Fort Jackson and the community?
It's a really cool opportunity we have because, generally the families start coming in on Tuesday or Wednesday, and most of them are of, moderate to low means. And so really coming to Columbia is their vacation. It's the only vacation they get to take that year. And so they come to the city, they don't really know where they're going. Some of them, honestly, never get to travel. So it's an opportunity that they get to step out of their normal lives, come in and see our city, invest in our city, go shopping, spend money in our restaurants and our stores. And then they get, the chance to see their transformed son or daughter or husband or wife or whoever it is in their family that they've lent to service to their country. And that's quite a sacrifice. So it's a neat opportunity that we have as a city to serve them. And then again, you can't deny the economic impact that it has in them bringing in their dollars from other cities to our city, which is what we want.
General Becker, you have an opportunity to talk with a lot of the parents after they've seen their son or daughter graduate. What's some of their reactions?
I always say in the 19 months I've been here, Wednesday is my favorite day. Wednesday's family day. So the families generally show up on Tuesday. A few will come in on Monday, but most show up around Tuesday. And they really do. I mean, for most of them, this is a big event where they spend their year's vacation money to come to Columbia, South Carolina, and Fort Jackson to see their son or daughter, their loved one, graduate from basic combat training. So I always take a couple hours out of my day on Wednesday to go talk to these families. And the first thing I hear across the board, and I don't know if you all know, last week Carl Lewis, the great Olympic runner, was here in Columbia, South Carolina because his son graduated from basic combat training. And I had the opportunity to not only go for a run with Carl Lewis, I won't say who won. I had the opportunity to go for a run with Carl Lewis Wednesday morning. I had dinner with him. And he could not stop talking about the transformation that his son went through in the 10 weeks that he was here. He said a couple of times, and as a parent myself with two young adults now, He said the last several years he loved his son, but he did not like him. I mean, they just could not get along. I think we've all kind of experienced that as our kids get to those, later teenage years. But, his son, when he came home over the holiday block leave, so we've been in basic training about 6-7 weeks, and got to go home for 2 weeks over holiday block leave, just a couple weeks before graduation. He said he was more selfless. It wasn't all about him. He was thoughtful. He was polite. He was respectful. All those attributes that, as Carl Lewis said, well, I just couldn't get him into it myself, but your drill sergeant somehow did. How they do it? They said they work a little magic. They're very nice about it. But I hear this, I use Mr. Lewis as an example, but I hear week after week from parents about the amazing transformation that their loved one went through while they were here in Fort Jackson in just a short 10-week period. The other thing I always ask families, just because they are an important part, is, how were you treated while you're here? Where are you staying? How have you been treated? And a lot of the folks are already from other states in the South, but a lot of them come from all over the country, and they are truly taken by the Southern hospitality. And I hear that again. When I leave here, I'm going back to Fort Jackson. I'm going to go over to the museum right across the street from my post headquarters. I'm going to talk to some families. And I'm going to hear it again today about how they were impressed with the transformation that their loved one went through, and about how much they appreciate the warm welcome that they've received here in the Columbia Midlands community. So again, they'll go back to their home states and they'll talk about what they experienced, not just at Fort Jackson, but what they experienced in the community, the people that they met, and the things that they saw. And I always give them some tips on some great restaurants to visit, other things to see that I've experienced in South Bend.
There. You mentioned earlier close to $2 billion economic impact, but also the retiree buying homes, and other than just the immediate detriment that we could see, how hurtful could it be in years going forward? We won't have those retirees if they're not here. How detrimental could that be to many?
Well, when someone spends a dollar, there's a multiplier effect. When you don't spend a dollar, it has the opposite impact. Okay, so if we did not have Fort Jackson here, we certainly would not have the same number of retirees locating here and making Columbia their permanent home. That would be a huge negative from an economic standpoint. So really what we need to happen is we need to focus on showing the U.S. Army how much we love them and that we value them in this community. And so February 26th is a big day. You heard what the general said. We're competing with other markets that want the U.S. Army. And we have to show the leadership of the U.S. Army that we want them more. And we have to show them that we value them more. And we have to show them that the investment that they've made at Fort Jackson is producing tremendous quality in the trainees that are coming out. A center of excellence, so to speak, is what we want coming out of Fort Jackson. This is our opportunity to show what we have. It's our opportunity to get more from the U.S. Army. And that needs to be our agenda. It is, we love you. We got a great relationship for 100 years. You're the best asset we have in the region, and we want more of you. And that's what we want to do on February 26th.
Thank you all very much. They're going to be here for a few minutes. If you have additional questions, let us know. But again, thank you for your time. Thank you for getting this message out, and we look forward to seeing you on February 26th. Thank you.